My name is Lena Park, and I am 28 years old. And at 2:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning in October, my phone woke me up with a banking alert. And I was sitting upright and reading the notification before I was fully conscious. And by 2:53 a.m., I had made one phone call that froze the transfer and began the process that exposed what my sister had been planning for 2 years. 6 minutes. That is how much time it took to shut it down. I want to start with why I had a banking alert configured to wake me up in the middle of the night, because that detail matters for the story to make sense. I have always been meticulous about my finances, not because I am anxious about money in a pathological way, but because I understand money as a system, and I understand that systems require monitoring, and that the best time to notice a problem in a system is before the problem compounds, rather than after. I configured alerts for all transactions above $500 when I first opened the account. The alert that woke me at 2:47 was for a series of transactions that had begun at 2:31 a.m. The total was $11,000. The destination account number I did not recognize immediately. It took me approximately 4 seconds to recognize it. It was my sister Dana's account, the same account I had transferred money into 2 years earlier during the emergency that had made the authorization necessary in the first place. Dana and I are 4 years apart. She's the older one. She had been in a financial crisis at 26, a combination of job loss and medical bills, and the specific compounding difficulty that financial crises produce when they arrive simultaneously from multiple directions. I had helped her, not with an outright gift, with a structured arrangement that included a repayment plan and the temporary transfer authorization that would allow me to move funds quickly if she needed them during the recovery period. She had repaid most of what I lent her. The authorization had remained because I had forgotten about it in the specific way you forget about a thing when time passes without the thing being relevant, and when you have no particular reason to distrust the person who has access to it. Dana had not forgotten about it. As I discovered later, Dana had been watching it for 2 years. At 2:47 a.m., I read the notification. At 2:48, I called my bank's fraud line because I had that number in my phone under favorites, because I am the kind of person who has the bank fraud line under favorites. At 2:51, a specialist answered. I gave my account information and my security verification. At 2:52, the specialist confirmed the transfer had not yet cleared the settlement window. At 2:53, the transfer was frozen. $11,000, frozen in transit, not yet in Dana's account, held pending investigation. I put the phone down. I sat in the dark for a moment. Then I turned on the light and I started writing down everything I needed to do next. The simple move was the phone call. I want to be clear about what made it simple, because simple in this context is not the same as easy. Simple means singular. One action, one call, one outcome. The simplicity was the result of preparation that I had done before the night it was needed, rather than attempting to prepare in the moment when preparation is expensive. I had the number. I had done the security verification setup in advance. I understood my bank's fraud protocols because I had read them. I had alerts configured. This simple move was simple because everything supporting it had been complex and had been done in advance. What I did in the 2 weeks following the call was considerably less simple. The bank investigation produced a record of the transfer attempt and the authorization that had been used to initiate it. The authorization was 2 years old and had been established for a specific purpose that was no longer current. The transfer had been initiated in the middle of the night to a known account, timing and method that the bank's fraud team noted as consistent with unauthorized use, even in cases where the authorization itself was technically valid. The investigation required my participation and my documentation. I provided everything I had: the records of the original arrangement with Dana, the repayment documentation, a written account of when the authorization had been established and for what purpose, and why I had not removed it after the purpose had passed. The fraud team was thorough. What they found during the investigation went beyond the single transfer attempt on Saturday morning. With my authorization to examine the account history, they found something I had not been looking for. Dana had been making small test accesses of the authorization over the previous 4 months, not full transfers, microtransactions in amounts that were below my alert threshold, verifying that the authorization was still active, confirming the pathway was open, testing the system in the specific, methodical way of someone who was planning a larger move and wanted to be certain the infrastructure would support it. 4 months of testing, 11 Saturday mornings where she had made a small test transaction in the early hours to confirm the authorization was still functional. 11 Saturday mornings where I had not been aware because the amounts were below my alert threshold. The one ding she had not accounted for was that I would configure a separate alert for the destination account she was using as a test vehicle, which I had done, not because I suspected Dana, but because I configured alerts systematically for all linked accounts. The destination account alert had been triggered 4 months ago by the first test transaction, and I had seen it and not recognized the account number and had let it go as an error. I had the record of all 4 months of testing. The bank had the record. And what that record showed was not a moment of impulsive bad judgment at 2:31 a.m. on a Saturday. It showed a plan. I called Dana on Monday morning. I had given myself Sunday to process and to organize what I knew and to decide how I wanted to approach the conversation before I had it. She did not answer immediately. She called back 40 minutes later with the voice she used when she was managing something, slightly faster than her usual pace, organized in the way people organize themselves when they have prepared for a conversation and are executing the preparation. She said, "Hey, I saw I missed your call." I said, "Yes." I said, "I need to talk to you about something that happened on Saturday." She said, "What happened on Saturday?" I said, "Someone used the transfer authorization from 2 years ago to move $11,000 out of my checking account at 2:31 a.m. She said, "That is terrible." She said it quickly and with the right amount of concern. I said, "Yes." I said, "The bank investigation identified the destination account." She was quiet for 1 second too long. I said, "Dana." Another second. Then she said, "Lena, I can explain." I said, "I know you can." I said, "I have the records of the 4 months of test transactions too." I said, "You do not need to explain. I need you to listen." I told her what the bank had found, calmly and in order. The test transactions going back 4 months, the pattern of Saturday morning timing, the escalation to the $11,000 attempt, the frozen transfer that had not cleared. She did not interrupt. When I finished, there was a silence that had a specific quality to it, not the silence of someone formulating a defense, the silence of someone who understands that the thing they believed they had covered has not been covered. Then she said, "Lena, I am in trouble." I said, "I know." She said, "I needed the money and I thought—" I said, "You thought you would take it while I was asleep." She said, "I thought I would pay it back." I said, "Dana, you tested the authorization for 4 months before you attempted the transfer. You were not making an impulsive decision at 2:31 a.m. You planned this for 4 months." She was quiet again. I said, "I have the bank investigation report." I said, "The fraud team has what they need to refer this to law enforcement." I said, "I have not told them to do that yet." I said, "I want to have this conversation first." She said, "Please do not call the police." She said it the way people say things they are afraid of, without the management, without the preparation. I said, "I have not decided anything yet." I said, "I want to understand how we got from me helping you 2 years ago to you planning for 4 months to take $11,000 from my account in the middle of the night." She said, "I will tell you everything." I told her everything. It took 2 hours. What Dana told me in the 2-hour conversation was not what I expected. I had expected something that made sense in a transactional way, a debt she needed to cover, a bill that had become urgent, a calculation that she had made about what I would or would not notice. What she told me was more complicated and ultimately more sad. Dana had been in a new financial crisis for over a year, not the same as the first one, but built from some of the same structural problems: a relationship that had produced shared debt, a job that had not worked out, expenses that had accumulated past the point where her income could manage them. She had been managing the shortfall with credit cards, and with deferring things that could not be deferred indefinitely, and with the specific private shame of someone who had already been helped once and could not make herself ask a second time. So she had taken instead of asking. The taking had felt easier than the asking, until the moment at 2:53 a.m., when the transfer was frozen and she understood that the taking had been considerably harder than anything the asking would have required. I sat with everything she told me for the rest of that Monday and into Tuesday. Then I called her back. I said, "I am not referring this to law enforcement." She said, "Thank you." I said, "I am not doing it as a gift." I said, "I am not doing it because I believe what you did was acceptable." I said, "I am not doing it because I am going to pretend this did not happen." I said, "I am not referring it because I love you, and because you came from the same family as me, and because I understand what desperation does to people's judgment." She said, "Lena." I said, "But we are going to have a real conversation about your finances, not a judgment, a real one." I said, "The same way I had a real conversation with you 2 years ago." She said, "Okay." I said, "And I am removing every authorization you have to any of my accounts, today." She said, "That is fair." I said, "Yes, it is." The financial conversation happened the following Saturday. The real one, the one Dana had been too afraid to initiate for a year, sat at my kitchen table with coffee and a spreadsheet, and the specific, organized attention I bring to problems that have numbers in them. What we found in Dana's finances, when we looked at them honestly, was exactly what I had expected to find when someone has been managing a crisis through avoidance. The debt was manageable, not comfortable, not easy, but manageable, with a structured plan and some difficult decisions about expenses and timelines. The kind of thing a financial conversation produces when both people in it are being honest. We built the plan together. Dana's version of me helping her was a plan she was part of building rather than a check she was given. I believe that distinction matters. I believe the first time I had helped her, I had made the mistake of making it too easy, too clean, too much a transaction that allowed her to not fully understand the situation she had been in. This time, she understood every number in the plan we built and why each number was where it was. The transfer that had been frozen was released back to my account by the bank investigation. The $11,000 returned to where it had come from. Dana did not benefit financially from the Saturday she spent 4 months planning. What she did gain from 2 hours of telling me the truth and a Saturday morning of looking at her finances honestly was something she had not had access to for over a year: an accurate picture of her situation and a plan for addressing it. She has been working the plan for 8 months. She calls me once a week, not to report progress in a formal sense, but in the natural way that people call each other when they are working on something together and want to check in. The calls are different from the calls we had in the year before the Saturday morning at 2:31 a.m. They are honest in a way the previous ones had not been, because the previous ones had been built on Dana managing her presentation rather than sharing her actual situation. I reconfigured my banking alerts after the investigation closed: higher sensitivity, lower thresholds, more destinations included. I also added a secondary alert that goes to a separate email account that Dana does not know about and that I check every morning. Not because I expect to need it, because I configured alerts for everything in my life that matters financially, and I will not forget to configure them again, because the one I had configured correctly at 2:47 a.m. was the 6 minutes that made the difference. The simple move was the phone call. The phone call was possible because the alert worked. The alert worked because I have set it up. The setting up was possible because I paid attention to my finances consistently and systematically. None of it was dramatic. All of it was preparation. I have not removed Dana from my life. I have not pretended the Saturday did not happen. I have chosen to build the honest version of the relationship instead of the managed version, which is the only version available now that the Saturday happened, and both of us understand exactly where the other one stood. It is a better relationship than the one we had before the Saturday. That is the specific irony of it. The worst night was the one that produced the honest version of us. That is the story. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.